Tonight's story is an original mystery inspired by documented wilderness disappearances and real search and rescue investigations. While the search procedures, investigative methods, and expert commentary reflect real-world practices, the characters, locations, and events in this story are fictional. 2 tracking dog teams were brought to the Timberline Basin campsite the morning after Denny Carver disappeared. They came from different facilities, different handlers, different dogs. Both teams confirmed scent at the camp edge. Both tracked northeast into the deadfall area. Both stopped at the same point, 30 yards from camp. The handlers worked expanding arcs in every direction. No continuation. The lead handler had no explanation. She said dogs don't behave that way without a reason. She simply couldn't identify what the reason was. Denny had walked 30 yards, and from that point forward, in every direction, the evidence of his passage ended. In the 6 days that followed, 60 searchers covered the surrounding terrain, aerial support, additional dog teams, methodical grid work, no body, no gear, no clothing, no sign. He was never found. And what his hiking partner discovered 14 months later is the part of this case that has never been explained. Denny Carver was 45 years old, 30 years of backcountry experience in terrain exactly like the Alder Ridge Wilderness in the northern Rockies. He was the kind of hiker who read weather by the quality of light and moved through backcountry terrain the way most people move through their own neighborhood. His hiking partner of 26 years was a structural engineer named Cal Merritt, methodical, prepared, experienced. 30 years in wilderness terrain without a serious emergency. Denny was not someone who disappeared, which is the first thing that makes this case unusual. And the second is what happened after. They reached the Timberline Basin campsite on a Thursday afternoon. 7 miles in, 2,300 feet of gain. An established site, fire ring, a spring 40 yards north, flat ground with good visibility in every direction. Denny dropped his pack and looked around. He said, "This is the one." It was a good campsite. It looked safe. It felt safe. That feeling, Cal would later say, was the problem. Friday morning, they hiked a ridge above the basin, 8 hours on trail. They returned at 4:30 in the afternoon. Cal noticed something within minutes of arriving back. The firewood. He had stacked it the previous evening, a deliberate arrangement, larger pieces on the bottom, kindling on top. He is a structural engineer. He stacks things with intention. The wood was in the same location, approximately the same amount, different arrangement, kindling on the bottom, larger pieces on top. Cal considered every explanation. None felt adequate. He did not mention it to Denny. That evening, walking back from the spring, he found footprints on the path. Not his, not Denny's. A different sole pattern, narrow chevron tread he did not recognize. Edges crisp, fresh. They paralleled the trail without walking on it, moving toward the spring, staying in the soft ground to the right of the path. He asked Denny if anyone had come through. Denny had been at the fire the whole time. He would have seen anyone from the main trail. Cal let it go. That night, a single sound from the northern tree line woke him at around 2 in the morning. One crack, the direction of the spring. He lay still and listened. Nothing followed. In the morning, his camp chair, left facing the fire ring, was facing the tree line to the north. 45 degrees turned. He turned it back. He did not mention it to Denny. But the case was about to move past footprints and furniture. The last full day. Cal walked the camp perimeter in the afternoon. On the south side, in bare soil between two pines, he found footprints, multiple passes, the same narrow chevron pattern, tracing the edge of the cleared area, staying just inside the tree line, not entering camp, circling in a partial arc and stopping at the northeast corner. Cal stood at the stop point and looked into the trees. Dense timber, limited visibility. He saw nothing. He did not mention it to Denny. At approximately 6:15 p.m., Denny said he was going to collect firewood from the deadfall area 30 yards northeast. He had his headlamp, a task that should have taken 10 minutes. He walked past the northeast corner, the same corner where the footprints had always stopped, and into the trees. He did not come back. Cal waited, then called Denny's name. The forest was quiet. He activated his satellite communicator at 9:47 p.m. The next morning, search and rescue arrived and discovered something that changed the nature of the investigation. 2 tracking dog teams were brought to the northeast corner of camp. They confirmed scent. They worked northeast into the deadfall area. They stopped. The lead handler ran her dog back to the starting point and attempted the track again. Same result. Same endpoint. She brought in the second team. Different facility. Different handler. No communication between them about the first team's result. Same endpoint. The handlers worked expanding arcs in every direction. No continuation in any direction. The SAR team searched the deadfall area on foot. They found Denny's tracks in the soft ground leading northeast from camp, consistent with his boot size and tread pattern. The tracks stopped, not at a rock, not at a water crossing, not at any terrain feature the team could identify as an explanation. The team documented what they observed. They did not offer a conclusion. There wasn't one to offer. But the question of what the dogs had actually found and what their behavior meant would not be fully examined until a specialist reviewed the canine data 3 months later. Tracking dogs follow scent deposited on the ground surface and in the air. Every person leaves a continuous trail of skin cells, bacteria, and organic compounds. Under normal conditions, in terrain a person has physically traveled, this trail is consistent and followable. There are many reasons a tracking dog loses a trail. Wind direction changes. A water crossing disperses the scent. The terrain shifts to surfaces that don't hold deposits. Temperature inversions can pool scent in unexpected locations. Each of these produces a recognizable pattern of behavior. A dog losing a trail casts forward. It works outward from the last confirmed point, looking for where the trail resumes, covering ground in a searching pattern before handlers call it. That is not what happened at Timberline Basin. 3 months after the disappearance, a canine specialist named Ruth Harlan reviewed all 3 teams' incident reports, field notes, and GPS tracks. She had spent 18 years training and certifying tracking dog teams and had been involved in post-incident analysis of more than 40 SAR operations. She said, "What the handlers described is not a trail that was lost. It is a trail that ended. The distinction matters. When a dog loses a trail, the dog reflects uncertainty. It casts, returns, tries different angles. The handler can read that in the dog's body language. The dog is searching for something it senses is nearby but cannot locate. When a dog reaches the end of a trail, when the scent simply stops, the dog behaves differently. It returns to the last confirmed point and works the area methodically, establishing that there is no continuation. Not that it can't find the continuation, that there isn't one. Experienced handlers know the difference. Ruth Harlan said all 3 handlers independently described the second behavior. Their dogs were not confused. They were done. She said, that means the scent ended at that point, rather than becoming unfollowable. An ended scent means the subject stopped depositing it there. That happens in a small number of circumstances: a water crossing, a vehicle, conditions that physically interrupted the deposit. At Timberline Basin, none of those conditions were present. No water feature at the endpoint, no road access. Weather and wind conditions were not consistent with scent pooling or termination in open air. She said, I have reviewed canine data for 43 SAR operations. The Timberline Basin case is the only one in my files where 3 independent teams reached the same conclusion. Scent ended, not lost, at the same specific point, under conditions that don't support any conventional mechanism for why. She said, in my experience, when dogs behave that way, it means the subject passed through that point and ceased to leave a physical trail in a manner I would normally expect to be able to explain. She paused. She said, what I don't have in this case is the explanation. The search ran for 6 days. At its peak, 63 personnel covered the surrounding terrain. The search commander was a 17-year SAR veteran named Petra Walsh. GPS tracked teams, overlapping grids, aerial support, a 3rd canine unit on day 4 with fresh scent articles. The 3rd dog team confirmed the same endpoint. The aerial thermal passes on days 3 and 4 covered the terrain in optimal conditions. 2 ambiguous signatures were logged. Both were investigated. Both were confirmed as wildlife. On day 6, Petra Walsh suspended the active search. The physical record of this case, she told Cal, does not behave the way a physical record is supposed to behave. She said it once and did not say it again. But Cal has returned to that sentence many times since. 8 months after the suspension, Petra Walsh agreed to a full reconstruction of the operation with Cal present. She spread the GPS data across a table at the ranger station. Every team's path for all 6 days, overlaid on a topographic map of the Timberline Basin area. She walked Cal through each day's coverage, what the teams had been directed toward, where they had concentrated, what the aerial assets had covered, and when. Day by day, the map filled in, a picture of a thorough, methodical operation working its way outward from the campsite. Cal looked at it for a long time. He asked, "Where are the gaps?" Petra Walsh said, "There are no significant gaps in the primary search zone." Cal said, "Show me the northeast quadrant specifically." She zoomed to the deadfall area. He pointed to a section of terrain where the ground rose steeply before dropping into a drainage on the far side of the rise. The GPS tracks of the Day 2 team showed them approaching the rise, moving parallel to it, and continuing northeast rather than going over it. Petra Walsh said, "The rise was assessed as unlikely terrain for a subject in normal conditions, steep and exposed. We prioritized the more accessible ground." Cal said, "But Denny was an experienced hiker." She said, "Yes." She said, "We made a probability-weighted decision. In retrospect, the rise and the drainage behind it were not covered at the density I would have wanted." She pulled out the terrain map. The drainage beyond the rise, not visible from the campsite, not visible from the primary search corridors, extended for several hundred meters, before joining a larger drainage. Rocky substrate throughout. Cal asked, could the aerial thermal have covered it? She said, the afternoon pass created a shadow in that drainage from about 3 p.m. onward. The pass was made at 3:20. Shadowed during the thermal pass. Not covered at full density by ground teams. In 6 days of comprehensive searching, that drainage was the gap. Whether it matters is a question the search never answered. 3 months after the disappearance, an investigative team returned to Timberline Basin with Cal, Petra Walsh, Ruth Harlan, and a field investigator named James Corby, who specialized in site documentation for cold wilderness cases. They spent 2 days at the campsite, walking every route Cal had described, measuring what mattered, building a physical record precise enough to be handed to investigators years later. Cal walked them through it, the path to the spring, the soft soil where the footprints had appeared, the arc they had traced around the south side of camp, the northeast corner where they always stopped. James Corby documented as they moved, not the numbers for their own sake, the relationships between locations that told a story about what was possible. From the northeast corner into the deadfall, he noted, was close enough that Denny could have been there without being heard from the fire ring in normal conditions. From the deadfall to the rise, the ground changed. The duff gave way to harder terrain, the kind that doesn't hold a print, the kind that explains why the tracks stopped where they did and not further on. From the rise, looking northeast, the drainage opened up below them. Corby stood at the top and noted something the search logs had not captured. From that vantage point, the drainage was not visible from the campsite. It was not visible from the primary search corridors to the east or west. A subject in the drainage would be in terrain that was genuinely out of sight from every area where teams had been concentrated. He said, I'm not saying Denny reached the drainage. I'm saying the reconstruction shows a plausible physical route from the campsite to a location the search did not fully cover. And the route passes directly through the scent end point. The rocky substrate in the drainage, he added, would not hold boot impressions. What ends at the scent end point, and what begins in the drainage beyond the rise? That question the reconstruction could not answer. It simply documented the geometry and handed it to the cold case review. A forensic consultant had reviewed the evidence documentation in the months after the search. She noted that the depth of the boot prints was consistent throughout the sequence leading to the end point. No sign of deceleration. No lateral displacement suggesting a turn. The final print was biomechanically consistent with a mid-stride footfall rather than a terminal step. She wrote, I cannot identify a mechanism that would produce this pattern within my area of expertise. I am not saying something impossible happened. I am saying that the physical evidence does not contain the information I would need to explain it. The second element she flagged was the chevron sole pattern, documented at 3 locations across 2 days before the disappearance, matched against available boot databases, and unidentified. Not discontinued, not an unusual size, simply not present in any database consulted. The pattern had circled the campsite on multiple occasions, and it was found again, fresh, when Cal returned to the campsite 14 months later. 14 months after the search, Cal Merritt returned to Timberline Basin. He signed in at the trailhead register and hiked the 7 miles in. He reached the campsite at 4 in the afternoon and walked the perimeter, The ground was soft from a rain 3 days prior. There were footprints, the same narrow chevron pattern, tracing the edge of the cleared area, staying just inside the tree line, stopping at the northeast corner, made since the rain, in the last 3 days. Cal followed them to the northeast corner. He looked into the trees. Dense timber, limited visibility, nothing visible. He turned back to the campsite. There was something on the camp table, an enamel mug, blue, with a dent in the rim in the same location as the dent on Denny's mug, from a fall against a granite slab in Colorado years earlier, with a wear pattern on the interior consistent with years of use. Cal stood at the table for a long time. He believed he was looking at Denny's mug. The dent was in the right place. The discoloration matched what he remembered. He couldn't find a difference between what he was seeing and the mug he had watched Denny use for over a decade. He could not explain how it could be there. According to Cal's recollection, Denny's mug had been recovered on day 5 of the search and placed into storage. Cal had no way to verify that from where he was standing. He took photographs without touching the mug and called the SAR coordinator. The coordinator said the photographs were insufficient for a definitive identification. He advised Cal to preserve everything and document carefully. The images alone were not enough to draw a conclusion from. Neither of them could draw a conclusion. Cal set up his tent. He built a small fire. He sat in his camp chair and faced the fire. He did not turn the chair toward the tree line. At some point during the night, he heard a single crack from the tree line to the north. One crack, nothing following. He lay in his tent until morning. At first light, he photographed the mug one final time, still on the table, handle facing out, the dent in the rim catching the early light. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up his pack and walked out. 7 miles back to the trailhead. He didn't look behind him. 3 years after the disappearance, the case file was formally reviewed by 3 specialists working independently. Each received the complete documentation. Each was asked a single question: what is the most complete conventional explanation for the available evidence? They were not asked to agree. They were asked to work independently and reach their own conclusions. The first reviewer was the tracking specialist with 23 years of field experience. He focused on the canine evidence and the boot print termination. He said, "The most complete conventional explanation consistent with both findings is rapid transport. If Denny reached the scent endpoint and was transported from that location by vehicle, by water, by some other means, the scent would terminate at the point of transport, and the boot prints would show the same mid-stride termination the forensic consultant documented. This is the only conventional mechanism that simultaneously accounts for both findings," he said. "The problem is that there is no documented mechanism of transport at that location. No road, no vehicle access, no water feature. The reconstruction confirms this. I can build the explanation in theory, but I cannot identify what the transport was." He said, "The chevron sole pattern, present across multiple days, and found again 14 months later, is outside this framework entirely. Rapid transport removes Denny. It does not explain a returning presence at the campsite." He said, "I can explain the canine evidence and the tracks. I cannot explain those within the same framework as the sole pattern." The second reviewer was the retired search coordinator with 21 years of mountain operations. She focused on the search coverage and the drainage. She said, "The most complete conventional explanation consistent with the search record is a terrain gap. The drainage beyond the rise was not covered at high density. The aerial thermal was shadowed. A subject who reached that drainage would not have been found." She said, "This explains the search outcome. The problem is that it requires Denny to have reached that drainage and remained there without moving towards searchers who were actively calling his name in adjacent terrain for 6 days. An experienced wilderness hiker who wanted to be found would have moved toward the sound of the search." She said, "The canine evidence adds another problem. If Denny reached the drainage, his scent should have continued beyond the endpoint along the route. The dogs found no continuation. To make my terrain explanation work, I have to set aside what the dogs found." She said, "I can explain the search failure. I cannot simultaneously explain what the dogs found." The third reviewer was the forensic field investigator who had worked wilderness cases involving both accidents and planned departures. She focused on the physical evidence pattern as a whole. She said, "The most complete conventional explanation consistent with all non-canine physical evidence is that the endpoint was a meeting point, a location where Denny and another person made contact, and where his departure was assisted rather than independent." She said, "The chevron sole pattern circling the campsite over multiple days is consistent with observation or preparation behavior. The terminating footprint is consistent with someone stopping and being assisted. The absence of a continuing trail is consistent with assisted departure that altered his footfall pattern." She said, "This explanation also accommodates the mug at the 14-month return. If an additional party maintained access to the campsite, the presence of an object associated with Denny becomes physically possible through that party's continued access." She said, "What this explanation cannot resolve is intent, voluntary or involuntary, and the identity of the assisting party, which is entirely absent from the physical record." The review organizer summarized the 3 assessments this way. He said, "3 experienced specialists, working independently, each reached a different conventional explanation. Each accounts for a significant portion of the evidence. None accounts for all of it. And critically, the 3 explanations are not mutually compatible. The conditions required for one tend to be inconsistent with the conditions required for another." He said, "When a case produces this result, multiple plausible explanations that cannot coexist, it typically means that either one piece of evidence is inaccurate or the correct explanation is one that none of the reviewers have constructed." He said, "I have no reason to doubt the accuracy of any individual piece of evidence. The documentation is thorough and internally consistent," he said, "which leaves the second possibility. The review was filed. The case remains open. 4 things remain unexplained. The dogs that stopped and found no continuation. The sole pattern that circled the campsite and returned 14 months later. What was on the camp table? And what is in the drainage behind the rise? The section the search never fully covered, that the thermal never saw, that points in the same direction 3 dog teams indicated. 3 specialists, 3 explanations. None of them complete. Cal still talks about this case occasionally. He is careful with his words. He is a structural engineer. He does not speculate easily. But there is one thing he has said consistently across every conversation in the years since that morning. He says, "I have turned every possible explanation over in my mind. I have tried to find the one that accounts for all of it. The firewood, the footprints, the chair, the dogs, what I found on that table. I have not found that explanation. I am not saying one doesn't exist. I am saying I haven't found it. And I've been looking for a long time. The campsite is still there. The spring is 40 yards north. The deadfall area is 30 yards to the northeast. The rise and the drainage behind it are exactly where the reconstruction placed them. The drainage that 3 specialists agree the search did not fully cover. In 6 years, no investigation has entered it with the specific question of Denny Carver in mind. Cal has asked about this. He's been told that resources, probability assessments, and open case prioritization all play a role in what gets re-examined and when. He says he understands this. He says he thinks about the drainage often. And somewhere in that basin, whether in the drainage or in some other location the evidence has not yet indicated, the answer to this case may or may not exist. What Cal knows is that the mug was on a table, handle out, waiting, and whatever placed it there has not explained itself. In 6 years, it has not explained itself. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real wilderness disappearance cases and search and rescue investigations.